Hey everyone, this is Sean Deveney from Heavy.com Sports. I've got Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider, with us. We're going to talk a little bit about the playoffs, especially the Celtics and Bucks. That series knotted at 2. They'll play a game 5 tonight back in Boston. When you look back at game 4, one thing that really stood out is that the Celtics did something they hadn't really done much of all season, and that's use a three-guard lineup. That three-guard lineup to start the fourth quarter erased a 7-point deficit, and that was with Pritchard, Marcus Smart, Derek White. What did you see from that, Steve? And is that something that maybe Ime Udoka goes back to again tonight in Game 5?
I think when we saw it the other night, I think it basically was about necessity at that moment, right? With Grant Williams in some foul trouble. I mean, he had been one of the better defenders, harassers of Giannis during the series. So twofold that, and I think there was a need to kind of quicken the pace a little bit, Peyton Pritchard has not had a great series because I believe he hasn't had much opportunity to find a rhythm. But one of the things that Peyton Pritchard will do for you no matter what is push the ball, push the pace. And they had to get more possessions out of this game. And Derek White, same way. The ball does not stick in his hands. So you had those two guys. You knew they were going to move the ball and keep it popping, which had been a real problem for the Celtics in the first few quarters.
Yeah, and I wonder, like you said, there was some necessity involved in what the Celtics did there. But at the same time, it worked. Does Ime go back to that? He's been one of the criticisms of him, and you can make what you want of it, is that he does sort of, decide what he's going to do and really stick with it. Not just in terms of an individual game, but in a stretch of time as well. I wonder if that's something that he would go back to. Would you be nervous about going back to that now that Milwaukee's seen it? Maybe they'll have a better way of attacking now that they have a little bit of a chance to game plan for it.
Yeah, I think if Boston does go to that, I think you'll see more of Bobby Portis. It's going to be a little bit of a chess match. But if this were a hockey game tonight, the Celtics being the home team would have the last line change, so that would be important. But I think you're gonna. I think you'll see some play with that this evening. Just the idea of trying to match lineups and so forth.
Derek White has shot the ball better the last couple of games, but you've been pretty consistent in saying that almost doesn't matter, as long as he's playing the way he's playing. And I saw a stat where the guys he was defending in Game 4 were 0 for 12 from the field. You can take that with a grain of salt. There's some mushiness in those numbers, but it does indicate that this is a guy who's doing exactly what they want them to do, what they want him to do defensively. Is the shooting with Derek White gravy at this point? Are you have you seen pretty much what Ime wants from Derek White, what they thought they were getting?
Yeah, I mean, I think they expected a little bit better offense, but I think we've talked about before with Derek White is that he doesn't take bad shots necessarily. I think he's probably taken maybe 2 or 3 since he's been in Boston, but he's one of those rare guys that when the offense isn't working for him, it doesn't affect him at the other end of the floor. He still does his stuff there, and even offensively, he keeps the ball moving and keeps doing what he's supposed to do there. Basically, it was weird. Earlier in the series, he had a game where during the season for him, he wasn't hitting his 3. But he was doing very well getting to the basket with floaters, etc. Yeah. And he had a game earlier in the series where he couldn't hit a thing inside, but was hitting a couple of threes. So, I think that they're getting out of him what they need to, and they'd love a little more consistent shot out of him. But right now you've got to figure that if you can push the ball and get it into the hands of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and even Al Horford, just your shooters, that you'll sacrifice what he might give you.
The pace is the big part, and he seems to be a guy who, as a secondary ball handler or as a lead ball handler, when you need him to be, is always going to push the pace. He's a guy that Udoka coached in San Antonio from when he first came into the league. So, he was involved in scouting him. He was involved in developing him in his early days. So he kind of knows what this guy has. So I think he has more trust in him than probably a lot of Celtics fans, but then most people would, just because he knows him at a level that nobody else in the NBA, or very few in the NBA, really know him.
Yeah, and I mean we've talked about it before, Sean, that what they gave up for him, the first round pick and the pick swap, is a lot for Derek White under any circumstances. But as we stated, if you get the guy that you want, if he's your guy, if he's the guy you believe you need, then pay what you got to pay, because even a high draft pick isn't a certainty. So anyway, but they've gotten what they want, and you mentioned pace, and that is huge. That's been a huge shortcoming for the Celtics in this series. Too many times they've been slow bringing the ball up the floor, and they're starting their offense late. And against Milwaukee's defense, that's a difficult thing.
Yeah.
And it's also translated to, once they get to the offensive end of the floor, they're not moving the ball. They're not playing with enough force. They're not putting the issue onto the Bucks, and I think that's been a huge problem for them this series.
Yeah. In Milwaukee, the way they defend, they really want to pack the paint. And if you give them time to set that up, where they can pack the paint and feel comfortable about still being able to get out and contest shots on the perimeter, if you give them the time to do that, they are one of the best defensive teams in the league. If you can get to them before they get that set up, it's a much different story. So, yeah, that's definitely an important aspect for the Celtics.
Absolutely.
You know what? Yeah. And, one thing I wanted to ask you about, Steve, and when they brought Robert Williams back in round one, you wrote a piece and you had a quote where basically the idea was, you're not going to do any further damage to this knee by bringing him back. That's what a source told you. Here we are. He misses game 4. He's questionable for game 5. Does that concern you at all? Is there any sort of thought that, well, maybe they did rush this guy back, or is this something that you probably would have expected, whether he's playing now or not, that he's going to have some aggravation in that knee?
Well, the quote was in relation to him bringing him back for game 3 against the Nets in a limited basis. So it wasn't saying, hey, he's fine forever.
Right.
It was basically saying, hey, you've got him working out heavy anyway. If you bring him back now, you're not going to kill him here, and you're going to be playing him looted. And if he shows any sign at all of a problem, you can pull him, and it's basically you've replicated one of his workouts. Although, of course, everyone will tell you that playing in an NBA game is a lot different than anything you can do in a practice gym. But I don't know the extent of if there's any serious problem that's developed, but they took out a piece of the cartilage. So, so I don't, there can be soreness related to it, I think, but I'm not sure that there's unless it was another tear that developed, then I think this is just, like I said, a rest thing he's going to have to manage through the playoffs. And now the games are coming every other day. So that's when an issue could happen.
Yeah, and the Celtics are certainly not going to divulge everything that they know, but assuming that what Ime Udoka said the other day, that that this is sort of to be expected, then I guess you wouldn't be too concerned. But but there were some folks in the organization who thought, hey, why rush this guy back? We have a big investment. There's his 4-year contract kicks in next year. He's got a history of knee problems. There's certainly a thought that, hey, let's let this guy rest and get 100% before we bring him back. But like you say, if he's going to be working out anyways, if he's going to be rehabbing anyways, why not have him rehabbing during an NBA game?
Well, that was for Game 3 against the Nets, where it was going to be limited minutes. Now you're wanting him to play more than that. And let's say this too: that had to be a serious problem, or it had to be concerning enough to keep him out of Game 4 in Milwaukee, because if the Celtics lose that game, they're down 3-1, and it's
over. Yeah,
not technically over, but as we'd say in Boston, it's pretty much over.
Yeah. That's it. It's a good point that of all the games, if you were to miss Game 5 at 2-2, you say, okay, well, they've got a chance to win if they're on their home floor, et cetera. But to be on the road in a must-win Game 4, for him to sit out, that certainly is something you wouldn't expect. I'm looking at this website. It's 538.com. It's well known for projections and all that sort of stuff. Very intricate math and things like that. They've got the Celtics as the favorites to win the championship at a 35% rate. Like 35%, I think number 2 is Phoenix at 24%. And it drops pretty far from there to where, Golden State is like 9%. That seems, a 35% chance for the Celtics to walk away with the Larry O'Brien trophy. That seems out there to me. What do you make of that? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, 538, the site it began as a political site, right?
Right.
I'm not sure how that they've gerrymandered that. But perhaps the Celtics could pick up a couple of congressional seats. I don't, that thing could change dramatically if the Celtics are down by a point and they have another tip-in chance at the last second, and it's still on Al Horford's fingers tonight, and they lose tonight. Right. If they fall behind 3-2 going back to Milwaukee, that changes dramatically. Story time. Before Game 7 of the Celtics Lakers in 2010, it was a few hours before the game, like way before, and I was just sitting courtside next to Danny Ainge, and he turned and he said, "It's funny." He goes, "At the end of tonight, in a few hours from now, I guess it would have been about 4 or 5 hours from then." He goes, "One team's going to have won, one team's going to have lost. One team is going to have, everyone's going to say they did things the right way, and everyone's going to try to think you need to copycat them. One team's going to lose, and people are going to be writing about how do they need to break it apart and fix it." He goes, and those are two hugely different paths. And we don't know which team is which right now, and we're sitting here, So, one game, one big fourth quarter, push can change things immensely. If the Celtics don't have the fourth quarter they do in Milwaukee, they're down 3-1.
Right.
Again, they're in trouble.
Yeah, these things turn on a dime, and a lot of times, you're right. We make these big declarations about where this team needs to go next based on one game that could have turned easily turned another way. That 2010 series is a pretty good example of that, because within a couple of years the Celtics were breaking up their core, and the Lakers weren't far behind either when you look at it. It is interesting to see the way that these things can change.
And in that game, if you recall, Kobe was having a terrible game. He was shooting them out of it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Anyway.
I remember I was at that game, and that second half, really, the whole says that third quarter was just such a grind, and it was just like these were too exhausted, and they were pretty old teams, relatively. They looked like two old teams who were just pretty exhausted at that point.
And the Celtics had a 13-point lead, and didn't manage their offense well enough. They were firing up threes because they didn't post up, and and the lead goes away. It was crazy, but that's that would have been. If they hold on to that 13-point lead or don't squander it all, look at how much that team is viewed differently.
Yeah.
So basically, it's like, the line, for want of a nail, a horse was lost, and you go through the thing, and, but for want of a quarter, a team that would have been, hey, they won 2 in 3 years, and that would have gone down as like one of the teams people talk about instead of a
Well, they've managed to milk that 2008 championship. Those guys for 14 years now. So imagine if they'd won 2. Good Lord. But let me since we're on the Lakers, let me switch topics. And again, I'm Sean Deveney from Heavy.com, and I've got our NBA insider Steve Bulpett with me here. And I do want to take a look at the Lakers, because there's been some news that they're finally beginning the interview process. Here we are in the middle of May. Where Sacramento has already hired a coach. The Lakers are just beginning their search. Mark Jackson and Terry Stotts. Either of those guys you see as potential Laker coaches realistically, or are we so early in the process that it's just too hard to say?
Yeah, I think it's early, but I also think that it's going to be difficult to get into the heads of the Lakers front office. Do they want a real coach that's going to take control? Do they want someone that's going to, stay within their food chain and what that front office has been like? I do think there is. I've heard enough talk to say that they're waiting to see what happens with Doc Rivers in Philadelphia, and they may decide to put on a push for him. Not sure how much he'd be open to it. But if they're, put it this way here, if they're waiting to do that, and again, we don't know if that's the case, but if they are, then they must have gotten some indication by now that he's willing to listen. Again, he has a job. So it's not like he can just, this isn't college football where he can, or college basketball where he can say, hey, I'm leaving. What's my buyout? And have some alum from the new school pay it. There's a lot of things to go through here. But as we wrote a couple of weeks ago, that there people were saying, I'm sure you heard the same things, that the Doc Rivers, Daryl Morey union was destined to have some issues. Doc was hired before Daryl was, and that's usually GMs want to hire their own guy. And there's, talk about a situation where there could be some upheaval roster-wise, etc. Philadelphia is a place where things could get interesting.
Yeah, it's a great point that, this is still a team that, okay, you've got James Harden there, and of course you've got Joel Embiid, but, beyond Doc Rivers, it's still a roster that Daryl Morey didn't necessarily build. That he's probably going to want. He's got some assets to do it. Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey. He's got guys who other teams will want if he wants to start finding ways to bring in his own players, which is entirely possible. That whatever happens in Philadelphia, and certainly the way they look Tuesday night, it's hard to imagine that this is going to end well. But if it ends in the second round, that's going to be a real interesting situation to watch.
Yeah, and the biggest problem, it would seem, is that the guy that he did want, the guy that he did bring in, James Harden, you've gone through 5 games of this series now, and you've gotten 1 James Harden game out of him.
Yeah.
But having said that, maybe the other 4 are now what a James Harden game is.
Yeah,
Maybe,
yeah. But
maybe
now you're Daryl Morey, and you've got to go to your owner and say, "Hey, let's give this guy $50 million a year."
yeah, and that
Oh
was,
boy.
if I was talking about this with someone recently, um, that when the NBA started doing these massive contracts, and I believe it was Larry Johnson that was like the first one, and that was like a lot of kerfuffle in the owners' lounge. Um, the fear wasn't that you'd have a guy, you'd sign him to this big, long, guaranteed contract, and that he'd suffer an injury and couldn't play anymore because you're insured for that. The fear was that you'd have a guy that was making all this money and would suffer an injury that wouldn't allow him to be what you were paying him that big money
Right.
for.
Yeah.
And now with Harden, is he going to be worth what he wants, what he expects? And and the marketplace is crazy. So who knows what can happen?
Yeah, yeah, and what happens so often, and I think the Sixers are in this position, is that, and if you look at, say, the Nets are in this position with Kyrie Irving, you're sort of married to the guy at that point, and you've got to pay him. Nobody else is going to give him that money. However, what are you going to? Where are you going to get a guy of that caliber with yourself sitting over the cap and not having the assets? So it's almost like the Sixers need James Harden as much as James Harden needs the Sixers at this point.
Yeah, but it's like, but if he's not going to be what you're paying him for, that's like an anvil that sits on your roster, on your salary cap, and it depresses what you can pay for the guys that you need to support a Joel Embiid, because that's your player, that's your guy that you've got to find ways to support him and augment what he can do for you.
Yeah. Well, that was all I had for you, Steve. Thank you this morning, and let's enjoy some basketball tonight. And thanks everybody for tuning in with us, and enjoy the playoffs. And we'll be back